All right, so let's go over the U.S. v. Lopez reading questions. So number 1, describe the law that Lopez was charged with violating. So the answer to that one is the law made possessing a firearm in a school zone a federal crime. So remember, at first he is charged under state law, and then those charges are dropped and he's charged under federal law. So that law made possessing a firearm in a school zone a federal crime. Number 2, what was the outcome of his trial? So he's found guilty and sentenced to 6 months in prison with 2 years probation. Number 3, according to the article, what are 2 considerations for whether the law is constitutional or not? So what did the Supreme Court have to consider? Is it allowed by the Constitution? And does Congress have the power to create that law? Okay, that one is really the big one. Is this one of Congress's powers? Number 4, what reason did Lopez use to challenge his conviction? He is going to argue that schools are controlled by the states and are not a power of the federal government. So he is arguing that it is outside of Congress's power, especially their Commerce Clause power, to be able to control guns in schools or regulate guns in schools. Number 5, how did the government defend its creation of the law? Because the Commerce Clause allowed them to regulate commerce between the states. Okay, so traditionally this was a really broad clause and it allowed Congress to expand their powers over time. So Congress or the government is going to argue that this federal law was constitutional because that Commerce Clause allowed them to regulate commerce between the states. So in this case, the government is arguing that it is within Congress's Commerce Clause power to regulate guns in schools. Number 6, identify 3 effects that the government claimed guns in schools would have on the economy. 1 is increased cost to taxpayers, so more guns equals more violence and injuries, so more police. The next is that people will not travel to areas that are seen as violent, so that could hurt the local economy. And then 3 is a threat to learning, less education due to violence. So that is the government's argument in this case. Number 7, explain the decision of the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is going to reject that argument from Congress and the government. Guns in schools are not related to interstate commerce, okay? So it is outside of Congress's Commerce Clause power to regulate guns in schools. So therefore, the Gun-Free School Zone Act of 1990 was unconstitutional. Okay, so it demonstrated that the necessary and proper clause can't be stretched to justify just any law, okay? So this is a way of putting some control on Congress's power, okay? Putting a little bit of a stop to that expansion of congressional power. Number 8, does this ruling mean that guns cannot be prohibited on school property? No. Guns are absolutely prohibited on school grounds. We're not allowed to have guns on school property here. It is just not up to Congress to make that law. It's a state power. So this goes back to the idea of federalism, okay? So there are powers that are granted to the federal government, and then there are powers given to the states. And in this case, regulating guns in schools is a state power, not a federal power.